So I love the perverse definition of freedom in American culture today. It's 2022, and that whole term has taken on a really unusual sort of meaning. And it's the meaning is basically like I can run around and do whatever I want, right? Like, um, but and it's particularly strong in American culture, and but it underlies America. Some of the things that go on here get broadcast around the world, right? Like, and people see that kind of stuff. But on the counter of that, what people don't sort of see is that what we live in is very much a constrained world, right? Like, we don't live in a world that's run around, do whatever we want to do, right? Like, that environment was literally the wild, wild west, or pirates, for example, where you would run around and literally kill people for whatever reason that you wanted to kill people, right? Like, that's the extreme case. I'm not sort of going there, but this notion of freedom is so perverse, and really, the original definition, from what I understand, is basically like that you are protected and you feel safe, right? Like, that's more along the lines of what original sort of view of freedom is that you feel safe from harm. And what that means, if you sort of view that world, right, it's a world that's full of constraints and full of, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this. Hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. There's some challenges with this, and you should sort of consider those things. Now, it's a real battle to sort of figure out what is the right amount of sort of paternalism, right? Of the idea that parent has to sort of oversee and give information. Um, but ultimately, you just have to stop and think about, like, hey, what world do you want to live in? The sort of wild, wild west where everybody is very much risk taking, and that they're doing all sorts of things, and they fear a lot, right? Like, the end result, if you have a quote unquote unbelievable amount of freedom, that the sort of definition that we have today, where you can run around, do whatever the hell you want, is ultimately a lot of fear. It is a lot of feeling unsafe, and it's the complete opposite of what you'd expect. So, to give you an example, right, a real example that I see routinely, and it's because I'm a parent, right? Like, if you go to a kindergarten classroom and people are allowed to do whatever the hell they want, it is mass chaos. It is people run around doing all sorts of crazy things. There's fights that break out all the time. Nobody resolves everything. Everybody's mad at each other. However, if you have a guide, a teacher, somebody that will sort of follow you, and sort of guide you through different things in life, that sort of put up guardrails so that, hey, no, it's not appropriate to kick other people. No, it's not appropriate to scream at other people. All of these kind of things. If you put up those guidelines, it actually functions quite well, right? And you have a good, wonderful experience. Yes, there's disputes that happen, but those disputes are relatively minor. And we have to sort of stop and think of ourselves in that sort of way, right? We're all a bunch of babies, right, in grown up bodies. We're a bunch of kids that run around in grown up bodies. There's no reason. So it's an arbitrary number to say that, hey, you're grown up at the age of 18, right? Completely arbitrary. But many of us develop at a very slow pace, right? Some of us develop very quickly. Many of us develop at a very slow pace, and it might be that we don't develop fully, whatever that looks like. Like, who the hell knows what that is? But you don't sort of see the big picture until you're like 45, 50, 60, 70 years old, and even still, you don't actually. That never happens. Um, so I just want you to remember, like, when you're thinking about this, just be kind. Like, freedom doesn't necessarily mean that you can be a complete, not nice person, right? And run around and do nasty things. Freedom is like being safe and feeling safe and caring for other people when they don't feel great in many different ways, right? Like that is essentially what it means, right? So if somebody feels unsafe, if somebody feels uncomfortable because of the things that they say or somebody else says, that's not freedom in any sort of way. And so we have to stop and think about that, of what that actually means. And yes, you can look around and find all of these exceptions, like far flung other countries that are doing this. I want you to remember when you're seeing that stuff, that's often very sensationalized, right? And if you're to live in those places, you'll find out that it's completely normal and functional and all those kind of things too. People get along, um, and I need to remind many people, right? Like the country that you live in is much, much, much smaller than the rest of the world. Many countries, even if you lived in China, right? Even if you lived in India, um, many countries are enormously much bigger. Like the world is much bigger than you. So the reason why I point out China is the largest country in the world in terms of population. Something probably is 1.4 billion people right now. That's freaking huge. It's a lot of people. Many cities in China are bigger than the entire states that we would see in terms of population, and those are growing. Um, I want to remind you that to get to that population, to get to a very large population, means that there's a lot of prosperity that's occurring, not complete prosperity. A lot of people are happy, and people are living a good, healthy life where they feel completely fine, as fine as what you feel in whatever country that you live in right now. And this is true of all around the world, right? We have to stop and think and say, hey, wait a minute, is it so bad there? Right? Is it so bad in that other country? Once you actually go to live there, and all sorts of people will tell you this, right? That have moved from different place to different place. Yes, it's different. Yes, there's some things that are worse in different countries. Yes, you don't feel comfortable sometimes, but often it is not uniformly bad, and often you get by just fine under those conditions. Now, there are some countries, before you get all upset and all that kind of stuff, there's some countries that are just like, it's just bad, right? Like people are oppressed, but at the end of the day, they still live their life, they're still functioning, and they're getting by, right? And I want you to remember that. Your life, um, we're all making decisions based on how the population level, how do we make that safe versus each individual. How do we make sure that each individual has some say, right? And even in the scenario where it's just one person, you live in a country where there's one person, there's always that even happening in your own head in terms of what is going on and that sort of pull on either sides. So I just wanted to remind you that the way that we understand freedom is not the way that we should stop and think about it, right? Like it's a complicated construct in many different ways, and we need to stop and acknowledge that. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.